Hello, and welcome to Wholesome Monday, where we are currently diving into Nancy's mysterious letter, going on a deep dive into the story and characters to find out, is it good, is it bad, what works, what doesn't work, and then have a discussion in the comments. As always, if you do not have time to watch the video, you can check me out on Spotify and just listen to the audio. We left off in chapter 4, where a mysterious lady showed up at the door and was right about to punch Nancy in the face. And so let's dive right into chapter 5. The mysterious gift. Though taken unawares, Nancy managed to dodge the woman's blow. She grabbed the stranger's arm and held it firm. "What are you trying to do?" she asked. "What do you want?" "What I want are my rights," the woman shouted. "Who are you?" Nancy asked. She was sure she had never seen the woman before. "I am Mrs. Skeets, and now that you've heard it, you'll never forget it. And don't tell me you're not Nancy Drew, because I've seen you go running around town in that car of yours. I don't approve of young girls having cars. There are too many accidents as it is." "Did you come here to lecture me about my driving?" Nancy asked the woman coldly. "Certainly not. Anyway, I know it wouldn't do no good. Girls today don't mind what their elders think. They go flying around as if they owned the earth." "Will you please get to the point?" Nancy interrupted her caller. "Don't be pert, miss," Mrs. Skeets said. "I'll tell you in my own good time why I came here." Nancy gritted her teeth. Was this woman unbalanced? She decided that perhaps if she did not answer, Mrs. Skeets would finally tell why she had come. "Well, what you got to say about what you did?" the woman demanded. Nancy heaved a sigh. "Mrs. Skeets, will you please tell me why you came here? I am not aware that I have ever met you or done anything to you." "Well, to begin with, I'm Mrs. Maud Skeets. I'm Sailor Joe Skeets' wife, which is my bad luck. Never forgive him for forever sailing off to all corners of the world and leaving me to get along the best I can." The woman took a deep breath before going on. "Joe's got a sister. She don't look like him, and she don't act like him neither. One thing I must say, he ain't stingy. But that sister of his, all the money in the world and her not turning a finger, but the money just pouring in because her husband invented some sort of stuff that takes stains out of cloth. Well, she condescends to send me $10 a week, if you please. And where was last week's, I asked you?" She stared hard at Nancy. "I haven't the least idea," Nancy replied. "What makes you think I should know something about it?" "Because my letter was in that bunch that was stolen from your house, and you're to blame." Mrs. Skeets almost screamed. Nancy was amazed. She told the woman that she certainly was not to blame for the mail theft. "I never saw any of the letters that were taken. Perhaps yours wasn't among them. The day it was supposed to come was Saturday, and one thing I will say about Joe's sister, she's always on time. No, that letter with the money in it was stolen." "I'm terribly sorry," Nancy said. "But as I said before, I'm not to blame. Since there's nothing more to discuss, I'll bid you goodbye." She held the door open. "Now see here, young lady. You aren't going to get rid of me that fast. You give me the $10 and I'll go." Nancy's reply was firm. "I am not giving you $10. Mrs. Skeets tossed her head. "Uppity, eh?" she said. Then, seeing Bess, George, and Hannah Gruen, who had come to the hall to see what the trouble was, she said sneeringly, "Reinforcements, eh? Well, that won't do you no good." And then we have a line drawing on this page, if you can see it in the light there. It's lovely, Nancy and the lady in the front room. The foyer, I believe it is called. You're just like all the other Nancy Drews. What do you mean? Nancy demanded. Have you known many? Have I known many of them? Thank goodness, no, Mrs. Skeets said, flinging her hands into the air. Just you and the other one, and you're both cut out of the same cloth. Cheat people out of $10 and then pretend they're fine ladies and don't know nothing about it. Nancy asked Mrs. Skeets about the other Nancy Drew, but the woman refused to tell her anything. I'll make a bargain with you, she said. You give me $10 and I'll tell you. Nancy was wary that this might be a ruse of some kind and decided to try a few tactics of her own. If I change my mind, I'll come to see you tomorrow, she told Mrs. Skeets. Suits me, the woman grinned. I'll bet you'll be around to see me. My house is 22 Cottage Street. It's not far from here, but it's not a grand neighborhood like yours. We're just plain folks over there. With this cutting remark, she turned and went outside. Boy, is she ever a weirdo, George exclaimed. Further discussion was interrupted by the telephone. Hannah Gruen picked it up and in a moment said, It's your father, Nancy, and he says it's important. I finally got an overseas call through to Mr. Bates Jones, Mr. Drew said. Nancy, the inheritance is sizable. He wants you to solve the mystery of the missing Nancy Drew. The girl chuckled. Wonderful. Nothing I'd like better. And, Dad, I have a clue. What is it? She related the visit of the strange Mrs. Skeets, including the bargain to exchange information for the $10. Do you think I should do it? Yes, I do. Then I'll go there tomorrow morning. The following day, while Nancy was tidying up her room before leaving the house, Mrs. Gruen came in, holding a long evening dress over one arm. You haven't forgotten you're going to wear this Saturday evening, have you? She teased. I'm afraid I had. The housekeeper reminded her that the dress had to be shortened. You'd break your neck in it at this length, she said. Please put it on now and let me pin up the hem. Then I'll sew it while you're gone. Nancy took off her shirt and sweater and slipped on the pale blue evening dress. Glancing at herself in the mirror, she realized something was missing. Nancy studied herself as Hannah pinned up the skirt and kept telling her to turn a little at a time. Suddenly, Nancy realized what the costume needed. The lovely pearl necklace Mr. Drew had given her on her last birthday. The clasp is loose, she thought. Before I go to Mrs. Skeets' house, I'll run down to the jeweler's with the necklace and have it fixed. As soon as the housekeeper had finished pinning the hem, Nancy took off the dress. She put on her sports clothes once more, took the necklace from a drawer, and grabbed a coat. Wish me luck, she said, kissing Mrs. Gruen goodbye. I hope to bring home lots of news. She drove directly to the center of town and parked. Mr. Whittier's jewelry shop was a block away. Nancy hurried down the street and entered the store. Good morning, Mr. Whittier, she said to the elderly man behind the counter. I think the clasp on my pearl necklace needs tightening. She took it from her purse. The jeweler looked at it closely. It certainly does, he said. Are you in a hurry for it? Nancy told him she planned to take the necklace with her on Friday. I'm going to Emerson for the weekend. Then I'll fix this right away. As Mr. Whittier went to a room at the rear of the shop, he called out, You caught me at a good time. I'm not particularly busy now. Make yourself comfortable. While waiting, Nancy looked at the large assortment of rings, bracelets, pins, and other bits of jewelry in the display cases. How beautiful they all were. Time passed quickly, and soon the jeweler returned. He showed Nancy that the clasp worked perfectly now. As he was wrapping it for her, Mr. Whittier said, How did you like your beautiful new pin? Pin? Nancy repeated. What pin? The one that man got for you yesterday. He said he was going to give it to you right away. Nancy was puzzled. What man was going to give her a pin? And that's the end of chapter 5. Oh man, I have so many opinions about this chapter. Well, I mean, not so many, but I have lots of things to say about Mrs. Skeets and about Nancy's interaction with her. We're back to the Nancy who is respectful but takes no shit. I am here for this version of Nancy Drew. So, going back to the beginning of the chapter, we have this lady who comes barging into Nancy's house, like her personal space. And I love the way that the writer describes her here because she asks the woman coldly, but not just that. It's her responses to the way that Mrs. Skeets talks to her about how she shouldn't have a car, about how she's out around driving her car. There is a certain stereotype out there of elderly people. And of course, in my experience, I have predominantly had good interactions with elderly people in my regular day job. I work with older adults. But there is this stereotype of older adults who harp on the younger generation and the way that they live their lives. And I feel like Mrs. Skeets is very much playing off of that stereotype. I'm interested to see if she will stay one dimensional or if she will be given a bit more characterization later on. She does just seem a bit more like a plot tool for Nancy to get her next clue, but at least she knows what she's doing, like in the story. Talking a bit about dialogue too, because Mrs. Skeets says she's not from as nice of a part of town as Nancy is. And you very much see that in the way the writer chooses to word her dialogue, just the words that she uses and her cadence. When she says certain things, like, she don't look like him and she don't act like him neither. Or like, well, that won't do you no good. So, like this sentence too, cheat people out of $10 and then pretend they're fine ladies and don't know nothing about it. So you can definitely hear it in her cadence and vocabulary and the way that the writer has chosen to set up the way that she specifically talks in the dialogue. It is, I don't think that people from like lower society or however you want to phrase that from like back in the day, I don't think they all spoke like this, but it is very much playing off of that stereotype, which I feel can sometimes be harmful, but can also, if done correctly, can be used as a tool to quickly identify to the reader the social background of a person. So, tread carefully. Don't play into stereotypes too much in your own writing, but if you can do it correctly or if you can do it respectfully, I think it can be used as a great tool. And then, sorry, going back to Nancy's attitude as this lady like barges in and tries to hit her. Immediately you get Nancy's standoff nature. She grabs the lady's arm. She asks, like, what are you trying to do? What do you want? She is very cold when she says, did you come here to lecture me about my driving? She says, will you please get to the point? Interrupting the lady and asking her to get to the point. So what we're getting here is, instead of getting characterization of who Nancy is through character action like we did earlier in chapter 1, we are getting characterization through her dialogue here. So the way that she's talking to this lady, the way that she's responding very standoffish and cold, the way that she is interrupting her caller and asking her to get to the point, all of these through the dialogue are telling the reader how Nancy is feeling on the inside. And then you get the character action of like Nancy heaving a sigh. She doesn't just sigh, she heaves a sigh. It's a very big sigh. And she says, Mrs. Skeets, will you please tell me why you came here? So the repetition of her asking, why are you here? What do you want? Like, tell me what is going on. Like, why did you come into my house and attack me? And you get all of this super long-winded explanation from Mrs. Skeets, all of this information that you don't need to know, which is a catch-22. It kind of bogs down the It kind of bogs down the story with stuff that we don't really care about as the reader and we don't really need to know, but it also at the same time characterizes Mrs. Skeets a bit. So good to do in small doses, but don't make a habit of it in your own writing. So we get that Mrs. Skeets expects $10. When the mail was stolen, she never received it. We get the lovely line drawing, which we haven't had in a few chapters, I think. What was $10 worth in 1930? Let's look it up. $10 in 1930 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $188.99 today. So it's basically like $190. This lady is asking Nancy for $190 to find out about this other Nancy Drew. It's like borderline extortion. No wonder she wouldn't just hand over $10. And also, just imagine coming into someone's house who you've never met, trying to assault them, and then demanding they pay you $200. And then when you need information from them, they're like, give me the $200 and I'll tell you. Wild. Absolutely wild. Mrs. Skeets isn't playing around. And then she gives Nancy her address. And I love George's exclamation, boy, is she ever a weirdo. Like, I'm very interested to see if Mrs. Skeets will come up more often. I kind of low-key like her character a bit. Just because she's so out there on the fringe. Oh, and what did Nancy call her? Nancy gritted her teeth. There's another character action that showcases her annoyance. Was this woman unbalanced? This is the most polite way of calling someone absolutely bonkers, like unhinged, unbalanced. I love that. I'm sure it's a product of the time, but nowadays we would call people crazy or unhinged. I feel like unhinged gets used a lot. Crazy is a bit kind of, it's rude. But there you go. The next time you encounter someone who's acting a bit unhinged, you can just ask them if they're unbalanced. And this, again, is going back to the internal monologue she sometimes has, especially going back when she was talking to the inspector's aide, when she had all of these internal, fairly rude thoughts, to be perfectly honest, but based on the way that the inspector's aide was speaking to her and treating her, he was very condescending, and she got defensive and got her back up in this so this is sort of the same vein where she's having someone come in, accuse her of something she didn't do. And good on Nancy for standing up for herself and saying she's not to blame, because the person who is to blame is the person who stole the letters, which I'm pretty sure we know is Edgar Nixon now, although that hasn't been fully proven without a shadow of the doubt, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty damning, especially with two separate witnesses who saw the letters exit his car when he drove away. And then we get a little bit of interaction between Nancy and her dad again. He calls her to say he has received information from Mr. Bates Jones about the inheritance and that they want her to solve the mystery, which she's of course excited about, and she obviously has to tell her dad that she has a clue, because that's just how their relationship is. They get excited about each other's news, which I am so here for. It's so wholesome. And that's what this is about. It's about wholesome Mondays. And then we get her going through, the evening gown, which isn't really, it's sort of pertinent to the story because she's going away and she's going to be wearing it. I think they only spend like half a page on it, so that's fine. She goes to the jeweler, and then we find out about the pin. I think this is the first chapter that hasn't ended on some kind of super intense cliffhanger. So we do get the mystery of this man who came into the jeweler who bought a pin for Nancy Drew. I'm going to assume that it was for the other Nancy Drew that we're going to meet at some point. So it leaves you still with that mystery, but it doesn't leave you with this sense of impending danger that Nancy is in, which is a change. And I do appreciate that after my rant from chapter 4 about how every single chapter had ended in a cliffhanger. This is the chapter to end on. And yeah, I don't think I have too much more to say about this chapter. Please do let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Do you agree? Do you not agree? What are some of your suggestions or criticisms? If you want to see what else I do on the internet, I have a Linktree. I have a Patreon where I post some of my spicier content, more erotica and smut stories. My lowest tier is $1.50 per month, and if you support me for at least $5, you get access to my Discord channel. I will see you guys all next week for chapter 6. Bye.
Thank you to everyone on my Patreon. Your support means so much to me, and I couldn't do this without you.